Now we come to Session 7, which is the last session in Primer 3. This is on ICT applications for disaster recovery and reconstruction. The objectives for the session are, first, to provide an overview of disaster recovery, and second, to emphasize how ICT can provide supporting information for its activities. So let's look at the context. Your disaster survivors are fed, and they're temporarily in shelters. Well, what do we do next? Now we have to think about rebuilding houses and infrastructure. We have to restore services like schools and hospitals. We have to rebuild economic development functions so that people can have their jobs and their livelihoods again. So disaster recovery is comprised of rehabilitation and reconstruction. It is a process that is undertaken by a disaster-affected community to fully restore itself to before the event, to its pre-disaster level of functioning. So rehabilitation are actions taken in order to repair dwellings, reestablish essential services, and revive key economic and social activities. Reconstruction are permanent measures to replace, repair, construct permanent housing, full restoration of all services, and the complete resumption of the pre-disaster state to set the economy back on its course. So what are the activities in disaster recovery? We have recovery planning, we have damage and needs assessment, we have human resource management for all of the personnel who will be involved in the reconstruction and recovery. We have information management, implementation, commissioning of projects, and the monitoring and review of the activities. So what are the information challenges for recovery? First of all, we have to be able to understand the rights of the affected community, that they have to be able to access all information on recovery. They need to know when they're going to get their houses back, when they're going to get their jobs back or their livelihood back. Will it give them some costs that they have to undertake on their own as well? How soon will government be restoring its functions? How soon can their children go back to school? So it also requires the government to release information periodically, in time for decision-making and more frequently during the initial stages of recovery. We need to be able to disseminate the information through a wide range of channels. And finally, we have to maintain accuracy of this information and that the government is credible in this undertaking. So there are tasks that will be enabled by ICTs. These include the post-disaster recovery planning, the development of regulations, the development of continuity plans, post-disaster buildable land inventory. It enables the creation of temporary shelters and housing and where to locate them. And it enables the coordination among the various organizations that will be part of the entire recovery undertaking. As with disaster response, it would be good if there is an information management agency. In this period, information is very critical. So an information management agency should be appointed by government to coordinate the distribution of information. It should also protect the rights of the affected community to access information. Information should be given in a timely and accurate manner, so they are responsible for that. They need to be able to promote the information dissemination and to maintain credibility in the process of developing this information. So then it helps support specific recovery decisions. They help define the information needs for assessment, for monitoring, including the use of GIS. They help decide how to locate or procure. They help sign agreements with other agencies on information and technology. They help take actions on problems of information, and they help analyze options and make recommendations. Now I'd like to talk about loss estimation, which is an important piece of information that needs to be had in order to do recovery planning. Loss estimation is a process for identifying probabilistic losses to a given scale of disaster. So it is based on a sector, on an area. It talks about frequency and magnitude of the hazard, the losses in physical and financial terms. And then from this activity, we can support recovery planning, and to do this activity before a disaster hits. Loss estimation features damage assessment, damage estimation. What would be the likely impact on assets? How much of the infrastructure may be lost? How much of the capital may be lost? And then you can assess that it will happen immediately during the event that created a disaster, or perhaps a continuing event. How much more losses can be expected? Okay. Now, loss estimation can also look at losses on the economy, on production, on reduction of income, on the increase of expenses that would not normally be there if a disaster did not happen. So loss estimation basically works on a hazard scenario. So this requires an ICT to create the scenario and to make a likely spread of the impact of a hazard. Let's say you can assume what would be the likely flood extent if you're talking about a 20-year flood or a 50-year flood. Or what is the likely extent of an earthquake after the extent of damage after an earthquake of magnitude, let's say 7, hits the capital city of your country. So you can use ICT to model the impact of such a hazard, and then to analyze what the effects would be on the existing infrastructure, on the existing buildings, and on the livelihoods that are in those places where the hazard is most likely to affect. And then with this, you can make recovery planning, and you can make a reconstruction plan, looking at where the hazard will have the biggest impact versus the least impact. So in recovery planning, basically we anticipate what kind of decision do we need to make given the magnitude of a particular disaster. So then you can decide where to work first, what area or what sector to help first. Will it be agriculture or manufacturing, and so on? What is the critical path to recovery, and where should you start from? The next slide shows a list of different methods or methodologies for assessing impacts. Some of them may be done after an event has happened. Some may be done before an event has happened. So for example, the post-disaster needs assessment is a methodology for rapidly assessing how much damage was incurred during an event, and what are the needs of the survivors, and what are the losses in terms of economic activity. On the other hand, the catastrophe simulation is a computerized model which helps you develop scenarios based on different levels or intensities of a hazard to find out what are the likely impacts that it would have on a particular settlement area. And then you can make a guess using the simulation how many people will die, how many will be injured, how many buildings will be damaged, how much infrastructure will be damaged, and so on. And from this, you can already make recovery planning so that you can prepare to have shelters, to have personnel on hand to rescue people, and to have money to refund the recovery effort. So now I'd like to give you a small case study of the Emergency Cyclone Recovery and Restoration Project. This project was undertaken in Bangladesh, where they wanted to study, design, and construct emergency shelters in order to respond to possible extreme cyclone events. So ICT was used to analyze the data that they had. These data included cyclone zonation maps, socioeconomic data for coastal districts, field survey of existing shelters as to where they are and the quality of the shelter and how many people they may take on. And then they had maps and digital elevation models. So the analysis produced maps showing the status of existing shelters and where they may be found. And they analyzed where the new shelters should be located and would it be responsive for the needs of the area. So this was a very nice example of how GIS analysis was combined with on-site survey in order to be used for planning future recovery work. So I'd like to summarize with the following points. Recovery management is facilitated by having an information management and coordination agency. Damages, needs, and losses need to be estimated and to be done quickly so that this is a basis for recovery strategy. ICT can support in the rapid assessment of these damage, needs, and losses. And ICT can support tracking project implementation and what has been given to the beneficiaries.